the trend was the higher the budget of an organization, the more likely it's to be ran by a man. And which is pretty heavy to think about. And for ballet, you see a lot of, you see it as a girl activity, but oftentimes men are the directors, men are the choreographers, men are, the artistic directors in our field too, and it's just how can we feel empowered when statistically we are not, And it's hard to think about because also for me, all my teachers at MSN right now are white men. The president of MSN is also white. He's very nice. I actually invited him to the panel today. But the thing is, representation, advocacy, these things have improved, and it's that is amazing, but power dynamics have not, institutions continue to protect abusers. I wanted to add on my friend Shania. She goes to Juilliard, and she reported her teacher for a racist remark. And basically, what they said is they took it, they ran it through the system, but they said it takes 3 strikes on a teacher to let them know. So
to let them know.
To let them know.
To let them know.
To let them know. So they need 3 acts of racism or sexual harassment or any of the sort to have action, which I think is
barely even action.
Actually ridiculous. And so it's like these institutions are not here for us. And by the way, they're charging like $90,000 a year to attend. And it's very easy to feel powerless. However, I think the 3 of you are doing incredible advocacy work. And we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I want to know what was your breaking point? What were you just I'm so sick of this. I have to do something.
I'm still stuck on the statute of limitations of what are the 3 things? 3 times? 3 times in your entire life, or 3 times in this? That is banana cake. That is something that I would have to. The question: what was my breaking point? Well, there is a reason why I have embraced myself as a freelance dancer, artist, producer. There came a breaking point where I was told I have reached the pinnacle, which is a really insane thing. To be a soloist at New York City Ballet, to be a core member at New York City Ballet is a needle in the haystack scenario. To be what still blows my mind is the first Asian American woman to have ever broken that ceiling to break through from core to soloist. That's even bigger. It broke my heart to hear the words, okay, that's as far as you go here, and we have made our decision, and there's no amount of work, and trust me, I am a person of work. When I am at my most frustrated, it has never, ever, ever been about tossing in putting it in the trash. I still believe that there's more to grow. I still believe that I am nowhere near done in the art that I will make, in the stories I will write, in the change that we will make. It was a point in which I felt in my being, in my mind, I was having intrusive thoughts. I was talking, to just being vulnerable. I was having suicidal thoughts. And this was not how this was supposed to be. I can't believe that everything that's being imposed upon me as these outside forces is making my inner strength crumble. And so it became a choice of whether I stay in the comfort of financial stability, or do I choose to bet on myself and cherish my life, my body, the creativity that I will be able to tap into when I step out of this environment that no longer serves me.
Breaking point for me company, I talked a little bit about the math of 10 years, and I started talking with a friend about it. It was in 2021, right after the shooting of Asian women in Atlanta, and we started to see on social media posts from opera companies around the US, we support our Asian artists. And I had a friend who was in marketing and advocacy at a company, and I was tagged in one of those posts, and they had tagged the wrong Asian soprano in that post. And I reached out to her knowing that she was a friend of mine and an advocate for Asians. And I said, hey, just so you know, you say you're supporting your Asian artists, but A, you tagged the wrong soprano, and B, look at every single picture that you guys posted saying you support us. You've pigeonholed us into Asian roles. It was all butterflies, Suzuki, ping, pang, pong, and there was literally no Asians in non-Asian roles that they had posted when they said they supported us. And that was when she asked me, so do the math. How many non-Asian roles do you sing in a season? And it was 10 years, 3 non-Asian roles. And she said, Nina, you have to do something about this. And I said, I can't do anything about it. I don't know how to advocate. I'm self-employed. I don't want to advocate because I want to work and I don't want to be canceled. And she looked at me and she said, Nina, you're one of the oldest Asian Americans in the industry. You've established yourself and have a lot of trust from companies. I was like, I'm not that old. But she convinced me there was a way that I could do it that felt true to who I am. And so it was in that time that she helped me learn what it meant to advocate in our industry, what it meant to advocate in a way that felt true to who I am. And that's when I started the Asian Opera Alliance. And we started with just a few members, and we've grown to have over 500 Asians working in the industry. And we are a place that offers support and continuing education and community. We post jobs, we do all sorts of things that we uplift Asians in the industry. And we've already started to see how that affects change in the industry, whereas, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it was me and Roro and a couple other Asian artists that were working in opera companies, and now we are seeing Asians singing in non-Asian lead roles at major opera companies around the world, which we didn't really see much of 10 years ago. But the breaking point for me was in that moment in 2021 when I was like, okay, I can't sit back and just let this happen anymore.
Yeah, I feel like I reach a new breaking point every day. It's been going on for like 23 years now, so. Yeah, I don't know if I can pinpoint like a specific moment where I felt, I can't do this anymore, because that's happening right now also. But there was, I think the Atlanta shootings were a big moment for me. My friends at Juilliard and I had organized a vigil for the victims, and also just we honored I think dozens of other victims of sexual violence who were Asian at the vigil. And seeing, and we had dancers, it was a very multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary event. And that was a big realization for me that there is a space for organizing Asians in this industry that isn't just representation, because it goes so much deeper than just seeing us on these roles and administrative positions. That's definitely a facet of it, and representation has opened up so many doors for Asians. But I think at some point there was a really deep calling to me to ground my organizing in an internationalist perspective and in a more collaborative perspective with other people of color. And Carlos, Addie's friend, and my friend, Carlos Walker, who's a very good friend of ours from Juilliard, he and I started this organization called the Bandung Duo very recently. I was very much inspired by this trajectory of me realizing that I needed a way to ground Asian organizing in a bigger perspective than just Asians. Because our struggle is much bigger than just us, you know, especially in the United States when all Asian oppression is really predicated on the oppression of Black people and Native people on this land that was taken from others, and then, you know, we live here displaced and in diaspora, and we owe that solidarity to other demographics beyond ourselves, and also to those abroad who are struggling as a result of our tax dollars funding genocides and war crimes. And so my friend Carlos and I started this organization called the Bandung Duo, which was inspired by the Bandung conference that was hosted in Indonesia. I think A4 also has a program called for a grant for Bandung, also inspired, for Afro-Asian solidarity. And a lot of our work is very principally based on bringing Africans and Asians together, and third world people at large, to organize towards a liberatory framework in the arts that isn't capitalistic in nature and prioritizes all of our cultural and also our artistic alignments beyond just, you know, what does it look like? I don't want to be remembered as an Asian violinist who did Asian activism. That would be cool, like that would be great, but I want to be a part, I want to be rooted in like a much bigger movement and in service of something bigger than just, you know, this niche that I do belong with. But yeah, I think that especially in, again, like in classical music where there is such a dominance of East Asians who take up a lot of resource from Black, Hispanic, and Latino, indigenous communities who don't have the same pathways into this industry, we do have a responsibility to build a platform around, you know, multiracial solidarity. Yeah, and there are so many Asian activists in history who have done that type of work. Grace Lee Boggs with the Detroit Summer Collective, and even the Yellow Pearl and their band that, you know, worked with Puerto Ricans and a lot of Black musicians as well, Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama. You know, we have these legacies of organizing between Asians and other minorities, particularly between Black people and Asians. And there's so much capacity to build that through the arts. And I hope that becomes even more of a priority in the years to come. But yeah.
Something to add to that, you went right to where, like, what does the future look like? And when Yellowface, David Henry Kwong's play on Broadway, robbed for best play, I will say. When it was on Broadway, we had a think tank after one of the performances, and it centered around this: where are the other communities of color coming to support this amazing play? And it begs the question: have we allowed ourselves to become so siloed in our specific identities that we no longer show up for each other as the whole? Because I think there's so much more power to be had when we all support each other as the whole. There would be no stopping us. And so I see this continually in Broadway spaces as a producer, and getting this immense privilege of getting to see so much art every spring and throughout the year, and also seeing this, and I'm like, we need broader collaboration between all of us. I want to inspire that. I want to fundraise for that. That is where my sights are. I'm no longer on what is the definition of Asian American. I don't, like, you know, I haven't brought up the diversity initiative that you can read that. You can watch the documentary, and that's all there. I have moved on from that. That is 2017, y'all. Like, it is 2026. Where do we go from there?
Well, and that's how white supremacy stays strong, right? Is when we are, as minority communities, pit against each other instead of working together to create something that is much larger than any one of our communities. And that is how we build real strength.
Yeah, I just want to hop in. I recently attended the Sphinx Connect conference concert or conference this past January for my first time. And if you don't know the Sphinx organization, they address the systematic inequities between the Black and Brown communities. And for me, I'm Filipino. So when I went there, everyone either thought I was mixed with either one of those things. So I felt right at home, you know?
Amelia.
Yeah, I know Georgina, you're also mixed race Filipina, and it's just also very fun to share the same, and I know we got some Filipinos. And so just for me, coming away from that conference, being in a space that is predominantly not white and filled with Black and Brown artists of the like highest caliber, and I was just realizing that I can kind of be this like middleman between the Asian communities and the Black and Brown communities, because people think I'm like in this weird Venn diagram space between. So I feel like I pass for a multitude of ethnicities, and I think for a while that was like I was kind of like upset that no one would recognize that I'm Filipino, no one could recognize the fact that I was Asian, hair, whatever. But I think now, just thinking widely, I feel like I can be an advocate for many communities, because I actually feel like I could look like a lot of different kinds of people, and I think that's like, you know, me and Georgina, like that is a superpower for mixed race people to be, you know, role models for others who may not be exactly the same, but they can, you know, relate on some level of your experiences. And I think that's, you know, just celebrating that and not giving in to labels and like the white male gaze, like, you know, not giving into that, and just like celebrating our differences and how we collectively share so many similar experiences. And this is why we have conversation the day before, right? But I think we're going to open it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions, we would love to answer them.
Reached audience participation. Lisa, yeah. Lisa, do you want to here?
Hi all. There we go. We touched a little, y'all touched a little bit on this. So hello, hi, good evening, I'm Jay. Y'all touched a little bit on this, but I wonder if you could speak a little bit with more length about, we see, as Addie mentioned, like coming into like spaces of higher education, like things look equitable, at least sort of now, you know, in the moment that we are at in 2026. And yet coming out, and especially as you rise through the echelons of what we call the industry, you know, it becomes more and more like, you know, 1930s, both in demographic and also in terms of the mindsets that people have. So I'm wondering if each of you maybe had something you wanted to share, like advice for those of us who are coming up now, entering the industry, you know, both in search of safety and also some sort of systemic change.
I thought it was really interesting. A couple years ago, Asian Opera Alliance decided to do a pipeline study because we were seeing there were a lot of Asian singers in universities, but we weren't seeing that translate into the industry at large. And so we went to the top, I think it was 40, I can't remember offhand now, conservatories, asking to do this pipeline study over the summer. And there was pretty much, we came away after doing a full summer of work, zero data that we could actually use. And we worked with an organization who was collecting all the data. It wasn't through AOA. It was you know a specialized group of people who were doing this project. There was zero data, and I think we talk a lot about diversity and change and whatever, but there is so little data on who is out there, who is, getting to the next level. I think one of the first things that we all should focus on is, what are those numbers and how do we change those numbers? What does it look like to change those numbers? As for, young people who are coming up, we were just talking about this before the panel started. How can you be multifaceted, multidisciplinary enough that you can have enough expertise in many different arenas so that whatever arena ends up rising to the top, you are able to help create that change. I was sharing that a couple months ago I was dropped from my agency because I was told that the people in the opera industry were questioning my conflict of interest between being a singer and being an administrator. And I said, well, let's make that change. If gatekeepers are saying you can't be both, yet we're telling the next generation of people they have to do it all, how do we create that change? Let's start speaking up about it. Let's talk about it. Let's create the change together. And my agent was like, I'm not gonna fight that fight with you. And I said, okay, I will find someone who will fight that fight with me. But it's about learning how to speak up, learning how to make sure that wherever you are, you feel comfortable, standing up for not only yourself, but for everyone that comes after you as well.
I just want to quickly add on. I asked the MSM admissions staff if they had any record of Filipino American violinists in the history of the school, and they told me first it was a no, and then after that they told me, oh, we don't collect data on Asian Americans.
This, not only do we not collect data, but I know I have a sneaking ask questions. The advice is ask questions, hold your superiors accountable for what they say, and if something is missing, ask for it. Use your community. I'm leading with the advice. Use your community. Also, do not be afraid to reach out and ask for mentorship. I have always, at any point in my career where I felt like I have broken through a tiny goal for myself, I am looking back and being like, who else is coming? And maybe I don't think anyone else up here in this room feels differently. It's spread more of that energy. It is also, as someone, in talking with Nina before, I called one of my mentors. I have been in a place of real turmoil, and I, sent a text that I thought wouldn't get answered to someone that I truly respect. And sure enough, at 10:30, hierarchies like, I'm ready. I'm calling you right now. And she gave me the whiplashing of a lifetime because I needed it. So you don't have to do this alone. And I think that's why A4 exists. That's why we exist. That's why these panels exist. It's not just a flash in the pan moment on a Wednesday in May. On sing, what is it? Is it Cinco de Mayo? We missed it. I don't even know what it is. But so that's with the advice, but also what I'm getting to in this sneaking, nefarious way that I feel like erasure happens is that not only is there no data collected, but I fear that any of the roles that I've done now, New York City Ballet, for lack of a better example, because this is the predominant professional institution I worked in, they will record the opening night cast, and they'll record a new cast. I am very rarely the first cast. That's okay. I like being in the underdog position, but I wonder what happens to those recordings. I also wonder what happened to the first of many other ethnicities before me, where things were recorded on videotape, and then they were transitioned to CD, and then they were digitized. Who is holding accountable the archivists of these amazing performances, of your performances? How Are we asking that question? Are we asking for those numbers? Are we asking for the receipts? That's something that I think we all can start to rally behind.
Yeah, I do want to add to this as well. Archival collection and data collection research are such integral ways of building community because it creates a community that isn't identifiably existent. That's something that has been forced into non-existence. It allows the pathway for us to organize together and see by the numbers published on record what is happening and where we are. And I also just wanted to share, my peak advice would be to build community. And that's such a vague thing to say, but there's like one, and I would really recommend that everybody watch this documentary. I think it was published by Al Jazeera, it's on YouTube, about the Palestinian Symphony Orchestra, which when the British left Palestine, alongside the land, handing off the land to Israel, they also handed off the orchestra. And one of the Palestinian men in this documentary was saying, now all of the original members of the Palestine Symphony are scattered across the diaspora. They're in Lebanon, they're in the US, some of them, they're just everywhere. And it's so hard, it's almost impossible to trace them and find these members, but that's one of their biggest focal points. And he said something that was so mind-blowing to me, was he said, maybe before we have a Palestinian state, we can have a Palestinian orchestra. And this whole idea of organizing musicians and artists around, bringing us back together, finding place and belonging through arts organization, as also for indigenous peoples as a path towards sovereignty and statehood even. I think that vision of organizing ourselves as like a force of real resilience, organized strategic resilience, where we can develop a conglomerate that can actually materially resist an empire or a state that's oppressing us. That was really inspiring to me, to see these artists building sovereignty around, just looking and searching and connecting with diaspora. Yeah, and I think that, I love that idea of community as like a real sense of sovereignty, and not just as like vague notions of, oh, family and friends, because that's not just what we are to each other, right? We're comrades, we're organizers, we're in like a much more devoted fight than just, sharing a good meal, which is also really fun and necessary. But yeah, finding the people who will support you from that perspective in a very principled and strategic way, who will double down for you, when shit goes down, because it will. And when you're vocal, who's going to be there for you? Because eventually we all become vocal, Yeah, I think that's just the most important thing.
And not all of us will make it as performers. And so the other question becomes, how else do we all continue to support each other in this Eurocentric art form that includes having staff members at all levels, at all organizations. It includes being, being donors. We are, in opera, most opera companies are a 90% fundraised organization. Only 10% comes from ticket sales. So we are raising, at opera companies, about 90% of our budget every year to operate. So who are the people who are donating? Because those people also have a lot of say. Who are on our boards? How can we make sure that we continue to diversify this art form from all aspects? Who are composing? Who are we hiring as composers and librettists? Who are we programming? And the more diversity that we have across all of these institutions, the more we will be able to diversify the institutions.
One here, and then.
I'm gonna go back when we were still in school, because you're talking about inclusive spaces, right? I'm gonna assume all four of you were born and raised in the United States, right? So in my mind, there's two kinds of artists. There are the ones who are born and raised here, and then the ones who came from Asia. And our experiences are different. In Asia, we did not feel, there's no discrimination or racism. We lived in our own country. You guys have a totally different experience. Now, that I just wanna give that distinction. When we're in school, it's more of like I'm gonna ask for encouraging words or how you dealt with it for people for Asians and Asian Americans who migrated here, whether they migrated here at 10 years old or when they're already in college. Did you ever have any encounters with fellow Asians where they have difficulties, whether it's still in school or after school? And what kind of encouraging words were you able to impart to them? How to deal with being in America, how to deal with a career? Because I think I'm asking that because for us, so that we would be able to know how to impart that in case other artists actually come to us.
First, the acknowledgement that the forces of assimilation, being someone who grew up in a different country, no matter what point you come over into America, they are so strong. You do not have to give up your identity, you do not have to give up your culture, and you do not have to hide it. So in particular, a lot of it was a language barrier, and so I would, if they weren't understanding something, you know, the language of ballet is French, and so if it was being lost in correction is being lost in translation, I would generally be the one to be like, they're not, can we try it a different way, because they might not have the nuance of our very many slang words, and kind of be of support in that way. Step in. That's my.
I would tend to agree, and when you were talking about how you asked about data, schools, they do not collect data on Asian Americans, they collect data on international students. And that was why we had such a hard time also collecting any data at all, because it was only international students. But how can you lift other people up and help them be successful? Ways that I do it is through Asian Opera Alliance when we're having these community conversations. How can I help you be successful? What can I do to help? And that's something that I try and lead with. I try and lead with it. How can I help? Always. How can I help? I am here to help. When Gina said, we're here, like, feel free to email, ask. I say that in every class I do, anytime I do anything, I want to help. But I can only speak from the I, and but I can do my best to help others. I can do my best to make sure that our emerging artists are being lifted up in the same ways. But it's you can only do what you can do, and then be open enough and transparent enough that you're willing to help those who need it, whether or not they ask for it.
I think I maybe am actually too young to answer this question because I'm still in school, like super still in school. But I think there definitely is a big difference that I've noticed between, and I speak fluent Mandarin, so I have a lot of friends who are international students, and I'm very lucky to have, to hear their experiences and to be able to connect with them in that way. And there's definitely a big divide in how we interpret politics or culture, or even just like navigating the industry as a whole, between like, or ABCs or whatever, and then also like those who are from their home countries. But I think if I were an educator and I had a young student come to me who hasn't been in this environment before and is like really put off by how racist America is, I would really encourage them to explore divergence in their pathway and to embrace multidisciplinarity in their work. I think that creates, allowing and encouraging young people and students to explore different pathways within their own field, or within a broader sense of what art is, gives us like autonomy in ourselves to explore what our identity is and what our belonging is in the industry. In a way that if I grew up in my homeland in China, I wouldn't have felt as compelled or drawn to these different disciplines because I wouldn't have felt as restricted in my own discipline. And so being raised in the US, it was absolutely a necessity for me to diverge and to do other things because there's no way that I would be fulfilled by just being a classical violinist. And I think that spirit of collaboration and exploration is really important for any artist really, but probably especially for anybody who's struggling with this type of new environment in the US and in US institutions.
I actually have noticed like the most amount of microaggressions towards international students being in conservatory the past 6 years. I think the way that teachers like essentially like humiliate them by making them say their name over and over and over and over again in the first week of classes is horrible. It's their name, like they don't need to have an American name. You again can pronounce Tchaikovsky, Kusvitsky, you can pronounce all of them, like it's not so hard. And also last year I performed An American Dream, which Nina had a very strong hand in creating. And so the premise is essentially a Japanese family and a German family, World War II. But the way that the cast directors talked to the Asian people was so different than the way they talked to the Americans, and it was so painful to watch. And I was really close to like in the rehearsal room being like, you can't talk to her like that, but I didn't, and I kind of regret it. But I think just encouraging international students that type of behavior by your superiors is not okay. Like, if you want, like, I know it might be part of the culture to not speak up, or to not notice these things, or not to, raise concerns because you just don't want to make a fuss out of it. But you should make a fuss. That's how you create change. And so if there's ever a moment where you feel any ounce of, I don't know if that was okay, you're probably right, and you should speak up about it, even no matter how long ago it was. Just to someone, that would be my advice. Speak up about your experiences.
And I think we can take 2 more questions.
Really quick side story, American Dream, which is about Japanese incarceration. The role was written for me, and they interviewed my grandmother about being incarcerated, and they wrote my aria after they interviewed my grandmother.
Oh, wow.
So it's true story.
I know.
Oh,
You had a question,
Yeah.
and then you have a question. Okay, and we'll just wrap it up after these 2. Okay.
Yeah, thank you all so much for speaking out and for creating this panel. I really, really love what you all were speaking about, and it really resonated, I think. So I was curious about, just when I think of these conversations being had, I think of how we communicate our discomfort and how that in turn can make other people feel uncomfortable. And I think that especially today in the technological age that we live in, it's so easy to lie in comfort and to lie in ignorance of what's going on. So I'm curious, but at the same time, I think that technology has played in a role in like a lot of progress. So I'm curious about how to best continue making these spaces. Is it good to create discomfort, or how do we do so in the most productive way possible?
Wait, I have a quote from Georgina that I remember. So, in the documentary, she literally said, we're programmed not to talk about race when you're the only person of color in the room. When you're surrounded by white people, you're not allowed to talk about race.
and I'll hand it off from there.
And from there, I love that you just quoted the document. I saw these moments of, okay, so we're speaking about AI. I need you to rephrase the question, just shout it at me one more time. I got so, like, you honored me in such a way that it blew the thoughts out of my mind.
Like, how do we communicate discomfort
Right.
in the most productive way possible?
Okay, so one of the things that Phil and I talk about a lot in having our difficult conversations is finding the point where we do align. It's starting with the point where, like, for Final Out for Yellow Face, it's like, I love ballet. We both want this art form to survive into the future, right? I am feeling uncomfortable here. How does this make you feel that I have been vulnerable enough to express this? I feel uncomfortable, I feel unseen, worse yet, I feel like aggressed upon. And so that creates, that eliminates the immediate shutdown of the attack. We know, like, there are ways to have fruitful discussions and not be in alignment. I do this a lot. I speak with people, I did this a lot in Ballet West, speaking with people who do not share my views, politically, socioeconomically, at all, but still having to put up this piece of West Side Story and find a space to work and be in community and hold each other in the expression of art. And so where I was able to ground and root everyone was in this shared love. So I suggest that you lead with that, and that could be, that'll vary, obviously, according to discussion and circumstance.
Yeah, I think, I absolutely agree. I think that there's a certain capacity that everybody, all of us, are expected, but also need to have in order to communicate efficiently with white people. I don't have another word to use. But also, I think that there is an extent to that as well. There's people that you can't put up with, and you shouldn't be required to. And I think this the disobedience of speaking about race is a necessity, more and more so every single day. I think it would be really beautiful if people of color, and especially Asians, because we're so trained to never talk about race. But for Asians and people of color in general to be okay with being disobedient and to really embrace this fuck you, you're an asshole. There's obviously some people, there are conversations that should be had and need to be had with, and oftentimes there are spaces where those conversations just have to happen for your own protection or for another person's protection and safety. But there's also a lot of relationships that, you should bring up race. And we need to be more comfortable with bringing up race, and not just race, but also, every political topic possible. This should, I think it's really strange. I remember seeing this meme, sorry. There was this meme that was like, with all the stuff that's going on in the world, it's just, I can't believe there's, and we only have 2 adventurisms a year in the US. That doesn't, there should be a lot more visceral reaction to all the stuff that's going on in the world. And the way that these atrocities impact our consciousnesses, our psyches, our social, emotional well-beings, and then also just our finances, our just basic material livelihoods are incapable of, we're incapable of really surviving or thriving in society because of these conditions that we live in. How are we supposed to not talk about it? And I think the expectation to just never bring it up, or even to do it very kindly and politely, is really something that should be changed. And it takes, steps to change that. And it's not like we can just go around and yell at everybody, but yeah, definitely training ourselves to be able to be vulnerable, like you were saying, and compassionate, and also very principled in how we address these difficult topics, and confront people for the things they do that are problematic is one of the most important skills for us to develop in general.
I feel like just with anything, practice makes perfect. So maybe don't save it for the really big conversation. Practice with your friends, practice with your family. One thing that, like, as we're sitting here that we didn't bring up tonight, that is a universal force that we all feel is patriarchy. So if you're looking for an in, at least relate it back. Men are under the forces of patriarchy the same as women in different ways, and there is one way that we are all circling around, and then comes down into the discussions of race, gender politics, everything. So the patriarchy is something that, like, if I could plant a seed in you to really go home, ruminate on. Because once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. And it's not to make you angry, it's just to make you aware of something that has existed before any of us even were an inkling of a thought, right? So frame it from that work, you know?
Okay, this is our last question.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Christine Bendel. I first of all thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership and activism. I have a question that may or may not be answerable. It might just lie out there, also depending on age. And I have to preface with a quick story. So 4 years ago, I did a production of The King and I had to do my costume fit here in the city to do my measurements. And I go out to Chicago, Illinois, and I was the role of Eliza, and they didn't have costumes that fit me for the principal role. And even though I'm little, I'm busty. And the costume mistress says to me, she's like, oh, none of those fit. And I said, yeah, no, I gave you my measurements. You got them like months ago. She goes, oh, I just assume all of you Asians were flat-chested. So now that's the preface of this. The question is, at this place in your lives, because I know you talked about your breaking points, but if anything were to happen from today forward, who would you go to? Where would you go to? May or may not be answerable. This might be a question that just lies out there for us to figure out together as a community. But have you thought about that? Because I know you're in leadership roles now. So it's like, God forbid, tomorrow something would happen. You know, where would you take that complaint to? Or how would you resolve it? Because I know for me in my early 50s, I go, this shouldn't be happening anymore. But it does. So again, may or may not be answerable. Might just be a question.
It absolutely is answerable. Where do you take it? You take it to, you have the conversation right here. Well, that, it seems like an omission of your duties as the costume director or fitter. And what can we do now to fix it? Because due to equity or non-equity, like due to union roles, I don't know if this is a union tour or not, like I am owed certain rights. So it's just basically reminding them that, like, you have shirked your duties, not me. I have done that. And being prepared to, I mean, like, I also, like, when I was cast to do Tarantella in a school performance, I was forced to try on sweet Erica Barrera, also a soloist in the company. She is maybe 1/4 of my size.
No.
I am not kidding. I'm not a large person, but I'm also not the tiniest dancer in the world. And Norma, who I love, this is like, I had a 20-year career at New York City Ballet. These are not people that do not know me, that haven't seen me grow up from 17 to 40 years old, 38 years old, 37 years old, whatever. And Norma looked me in the eye and said, Mark will not let me make you a new costume until I prove to him that it will not fit. And I said, as long as we are acknowledging how fucked up this is, I will gladly put this on, and you can send the bare-assed picture to Mark to create the new costume. This will probably give me so much trouble because I just named everyone. Like, work on edit later. Or maybe this is just the aside that doesn't, this is for us only. Allegedly. There we go. Allegedly. But yeah, that is something that happened, and it was discussion. I was like, Norma, this can happen with me because I have the fortitude, I have done my work on myself, I am not, my body dysmorphia is handled in that way. Don't promise me you will never do this to someone who's younger. Promise me this is the last time this ever happens. And she did, she looked me in my eye and said, this will not happen. So yeah, there are ways to go about it in taking it to the higher ups. There's also ways, person to person, in the moment.
Well, in the moment, I didn't realize how racist it was, and it came up in a conversation after the contract was over. And my friend of mine was the one that said, "You didn't say anything?" I was like, "What? That's so racist." I'm going, "Oh my God, it is." Like, it took me months to realize it. That's why it's like, where would that grievance go now? You know.
A couple years ago, I was brought in for an audition, not to sing, but to look at my body because they were afraid I was going to be too big to be Japanese on stage. And I had to be brought in for the director to make sure that I was not too big. But I am now in a place of leadership. I have privilege that I did not have 6 years ago, 5 years ago, but now I feel confident and comfortable being the person to stick their neck out, and I am happy to do that for other people. I have, my community, people like Phil, who I will go to and ask advice to, or other folks who have become, mentors and confidants of mine that I can go and say, what should I do? I've gone to the union just 2 years ago. I was working at a non-union company, but I'm a union member, and some stuff happened, and I went to the union. I said, hey, this is not okay. And they said, yeah, but it's not illegal. They haven't done anything illegal, so since we're not, a union company, they're not a union company, we can't help you. However, there are ways you can go about doing it. You just have to know who those people are and feel comfortable with whomever that person is, and feel like there is a safe person that you can go to that can then help if you don't feel safe.
But also, in the most petty of ways, word of mouth. Spread it around.
I hope that this released the burden that you had, just sharing it here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think gossip is the way to go. And also, being organized and being part of a union, reporting these things to a structural entity is really important. I don't know if anybody else like me has ever gone through Title IX. It fucking sucks. And all of these reporting, these leadership roles and administrative organizations are often very difficult to be able to report things like this with. They're hard to, they suck a lot of time. But it leaves a trail, and it provides a semblance of accountability for others. And in the future, it may not relieve you or make you feel any better, but for others in the future, it creates a paper trail of things that have happened, and that's very, very important in reportings. But apart from that, really, I do think that gossip for real, it is a tool of support, and I think that our community, the people that we hold very close to us, are the ones who would pull me through. I did have very recently my quartet. My quartet is 3 white people and me, and we did a photo shoot, and allegedly the photos came back and everybody looked incredible, but my face was like half the size skinnier. My nose was straightened. My eyes were widened, and my hair was lightened. It was really weird. My skin was also it was ashy. It was white. It was crazy. I was like, I know that I'm a little yellower. Right. I know it's winter, but it's I'm not that shade. I'm not pink. So it was really bizarre. And there was, I went back and forth in my head. I was like, this doesn't even look like me. I fully look like a white woman. And my quartet makes look incredible. And so I had an internal battle of how do I report this? These photos are not usable. Honestly, I don't even feel like I should pay for them. This can't come out of our, this is just ridiculous. And I didn't know how to go about it, but I sent a very lengthy email. I had like before and after photos from the unedited version and the edited version. I like zoomed in on my eyeball. You know, I really came like with all the evidence compiled in the email. And the reception was actually much better than I thought. I think we did have to end up paying for it, but so maybe it wasn't as good. But yeah, I think that knowing that you have the ability to stand up for yourself and you can take action. It is up to them whether or not they want to receive it and do something with it. But it is important for us to leave that paper trail and to know that something happened and we did do something. It doesn't matter if it's 6 months from now or if it's like immediately the day after it happened. But the acknowledgement of something happening and the accountability measure of that never being able to happen again, for that photographer to know, oh shit, like I should not have done that. Now I just lost my income from this client, is an incredibly important thing for strategy in the future. Is just leaving that trail. I think is it's incredibly important. And then also telling all your friends about it so they don't live with that person ever again.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you all for this incredible.
I don't know if you all know this, but my internship is kind of ending very soon. I've been working with A4 for the past 9 months, and this is like my last intern project. So I thank you all so much for joining me. Oh, and we will be sending these slides out. I will be sending them out on Friday. There's some seltzers waters in the back. We do have to be out of here like 8:40. So yeah, thank you all so much.